Hi, everyone. Welcome to another segment of our Mental Health Moments series. I am so glad to see you all today. We had to have a last-minute calendar change because our sweet Maureen, who normally runs these, is out sick today. So I'm glad that you all found the updated link and are with us today. So Charles, again, so glad to have you here, our behavior health therapist. How are you today, Charles?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself, Linda? Good?
I'm good. Staying warm, staying inside for the most part. So
Well, that's half the battle in this weather. That's for darn sure.
absolutely. So we just want to circle back to last month's session just a little bit. We talked about the book, The Mole, the Boy, the Fox, and the Horse. And if anybody has any feedback from that or any kind of inspiration or changes that you made within the last month, based upon that discussion, based upon something that you got out of that conversation, we would love to hear about that in the chat. So feel free to put that in. While some of you are doing that, I just kind of want to frame up what we're going to be looking at today. So in connection to our Lifesaver Wellbeing series, this month we've been talking about building our immunity, doing things to take care of ourselves to build our immunity. And I'm excited today to connect that to our mental health and really take a dive into how we can use our brains to also help our immunity. So I think that's going to be really fun. So Charles, you and I were having a really fascinating discussion, and you were telling me about this awesome discovery called default mode. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about what that means and maybe how we can apply that?
Sure. So I'll talk about it first from a standpoint of maybe how we can all even get in touch with what this is I think everybody has been on a vacation or at a quiet place, or even if it wasn't such a quiet place. Let's say, for example, someone is reading through a page on a book, and you're reading through this paragraph, and all of a sudden, I don't know what I just read. In fact, I'm going into the next paragraph, and all of a sudden, I don't know what they're talking about. Somehow, what we were looking at, what we were thinking about, whether it was when we were in 5th grade or 5 days ago, the brain can do that. It can leave what we're focusing on and shift to something else. And even right now, if we had said, let's take a minute and think about what the natural state of the brain is, which is supposed to be this beautiful, vast blue sky of just open thoughts, everything great, nothing else there, we would eventually not necessarily have that, but we would have other thoughts come into our mind. This thing that I'm just describing right now is called the default mode network. That is this psychological experience that we have where what we are focusing on, what we're thinking of, what's happening is different than what is happening right now, such an event right in front of us. So this is called the default mode network. So I want to say 2 things about it to orchestrate our minds towards what this is. And I want to start by saying everybody on this call has this. This is a universal phenomenon that we experience, and it's marked by when we are not active in our mind through a task, through an activity, through a focus, our mind has a tendency to default to a system within the brain, hence the default mode network, this network in the brain that when not active gets online, it gets activated. So this was discovered this way, that when people were investigating, neuroscientists investigating healthy minds, healthy brains, wanting to understand what happens in the brain when we do math, what happens in the brain when we draw, what happens in the brain if we are playing piano, what happens in the brain when we're driving, reading, whatever it might be. As investigators, researchers, neuroscientists have wanted to learn more about what's happening in the brain, there was this kind of unspoken assumption that if we're not doing any of those things, the brain is probably resting, taking it easy, getting recovery, any of those type of things. However, what was discovered was it's not quite that easy. When the brain's not doing those things, this online development of the default mode kicks in, and that is what we do when we're at rest. And I'll explain that a little bit more. But before I do, Linda, any questions or comments on that, even that part of it and the discovery process and what it means?
Well, I think it's really interesting to think about the science behind that. And I love when well-being and science like come together, when we start to have some good data and some good information as to why things happen. And I think it's so comforting, Charles, to be able to know I'm not just a daydreamer. I'm not just a lazy person. I'm not just, that I'm not engaging in something, that truly our mind is working all the time, correct?
Yes, that's very correct, very accurate. In fact, even what you just described, that most people that I talk to when they learn more about this default network think to themselves, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one who had that happen. When I was trying to read and I was focusing and I still couldn't. Or people, even now, if they're learning, like, for example, meditation, that I can't do it. Well, why can't you do it? My brain just goes. Every time I try to do it, my brain just goes. So I can't do it. And I'll explain this network to them, and that it isn't that you can't do it. None of us can do it. That's why we need it. That our brain is always doing that. It's not just yours. Your default mode networks looks like Jane Smith's, John Smith's, Pete Smith's, Brenda Smith's, Elizabeth Smith. Everybody has this default mode that is activated at different times, and it's most notably at rest. Most notably when we are not trying to be active in any way is when it actually comes on. We don't try to make this happen, it just does, and we all do it. So that's the universal nature. We're all in this together when it comes to default mode network. There's a very small population that doesn't necessarily demonstrate this. And maybe as we go through it, people can even think, what would that population be? But we'll talk about that later. So no, back to your point, that is totally on target.
So then this default mode, is that what's going on when I go to bed at night and all of a sudden everything that I forgot to do that day or everything that I'm thinking about that I have to do tomorrow starts flooding my head? Is that default mode when I'm really trying to lay down and sleep?
Well, not only is that the answer to that yes, it's an emphatic yes. And even more emphatic because that's probably the time that we can most identify whether or not this goes on for us. So I'll explain this sometimes to people and it'll be, oh my gosh, what you just described is me trying to go to sleep. I'm exhausted physically and mentally, and I lay down, and then all of a sudden, boom. My brain goes off. I start thinking about this meeting that I had earlier, why I said what I said, why I didn't say what I didn't say, should I have said that, why didn't I say this? And that is exactly the type of thing that people will tell me, I wish I could just turn my brain off, light the light switch, because even though I'm exhausted, Now default mode is in full bloom. It is absolutely totally online. And sometimes the problem with it being so online then is that if it happened to someone right now during this meeting, and by the way, it's like 11 after, it probably already has. At some point, people were thinking, oh, I got a meeting coming up. I didn't get lunch yet, or I ate too much for lunch, or what am I going to have for dinner? What's this guy talking about again? And that's if you're riveted. I mean, that's if you were like, I really want to know this. I really want to get this. That can happen. But then we could distract ourselves back to the task, to the focus. Let me listen to Linda, so forth. But at night, when we go to bed, there isn't that. We're just trying to, our distraction is we want to fall asleep. Our task is we want to fall asleep. But with default mode going, sometimes people find that difficult to do. So you are exactly right. That is probably the most notable time that default mode shows up in our lives. And we think, what is this doing here? Why am I thinking of all these things? Why is this happening to me now? All I wanted to do was go to sleep. And now my brain won't shut off. That's default mode showing up, making a presence in your life. So absolutely right on target.
And that's why it's so important for us to talk about this and start to figure out if we can do something about it, because it really directly then connects to our immunity. Because if I never get any sleep because I'm never able to turn my brain off, my immune system is obviously going to suffer if I don't get that restorative rest and if I don't recharge myself in some way. So then, Charles, what can we do about this? I mean, this is how our brains are wired. We all have this in common. How do we start to control this? How do we start to be able to have some influence on the default mode?
Yeah, great question. Super thoughtful. So a couple things. The first one is we're doing it. Name it to tame it. Understand it. Not knowing this, and again, this is pretty universal too. What people tell me, I thought I was the only one who had that struggle at night. I thought I was the only one whose brain didn't turn off. I thought most people, and we all know other people struggle with sleep, but we don't always know or think this is why. So the awareness, and one of the reasons I think it's so important for us to be talking about this today and how it relates to immunity is this process. Being aware, knowledgeable, insightful. I've had many people say just knowing this, just hearing this, just having this understanding in and of itself is a game changer. So, but I want to say a couple more things about it to understand it, and then even more of how we change the game in relationship to what you're asking. So to really understand and fully appreciate the default mode network and what it's about, there's really 4 essential elements to it. And I'm going to walk through the 4. The first one, when the default mode is activated and online and running away with us, is commentary. It's full of commentary. It loves to comment. It's an inner commentary, this inner commentary in which it's always interpreting our experience. Like your mind is producing this opinion. It's like if you're watching the Super Bowl or the Packers' last game, when there's color commentating going on, your brain is doing that of your world. Oh, it's hot here. It's super cold out right now. When is it ever going to warm up? That dinner was terrible. That lunch was terrible. Or I didn't sleep good last night. You know, anything like that. The commentary that you have, that's part of what default mode actually is all about. The second part, once that commentary is there, that commentary really typically goes negative or critical. And with that, the second full component is this thing of time travel. And this idea that, like what you were giving the example of, Linda, at night, is we will review our day. So the first part usually is that we go historical. We go in the past. What was this like? What was that like? We remember our life through the day, sometimes even days. This meeting today, I think of my boss, or I think of my friend, or I think of that meeting that didn't go well. Whatever it is, we will kind of process through the day. Secondly, we will then oftentimes project that to the future. So we'll think backwards, we'll project forward. Well, I got that meeting tomorrow. How will that go? Well, because this one didn't go well, maybe that one won't either. We will go back and forth really consistently. And that's where the term wandering mind comes from, and what the default mode network often is thought to represent. This mind that will wander backwards, forwards, backwards, forwards. We'll think of a future vacation that we want to go on. And even when we're thinking positive there, we could even go critical with that. Thinking like, well, it's going to be cold there. Will COVID be over? If it's Broadway, will Broadway be opened up again yet? That sort of thing. We will time travel and then even go somewhat critical about the future that hasn't even happened yet, or the worry tomorrow of what tomorrow may bring. So that's oftentimes what people will most characterize in their default mode experience, that backward, forward travel. The third component is described as self-referential processing. So in the self-referential processing, that's the brain's natural way of how we interpret our reality and interpret our life, is that our experiences, this is who I'm about. I'm a person who loves Broadway. I'm a person who loves travel. I'm a person who loves science. I'm a person who reads. I'm a person who should be treated this way. How could they have treated me like that? How could that person have said that to me? I had talked with someone just a couple of days ago, and they were called in a meeting, something I think that should never happen. I won't even say the word, but the person could not stop thinking about it. All it was is, how in this day and age can someone say that to me? How could that happen in a meeting? How could a supervisor let that happen? And just perpetuated this ruminating perspective about it. So some people are more prone to a ruminating pattern in the way they think, and then hence the way they feel. And this default mode is where that comes into play. But it's how I'm interpreting my world in relationship to who I am and who I think I want to be and the person I want to become. So it's basically setting or threading our personal narrative. This default mode narrates our life for us in a way. The fourth part of default mode network is social comparison or social cognition. This is the part where we examine ourselves in relation to other people. Relationship category of who's my friend, who's not my friend, who do I get along with, who I don't. I so appreciate Linda, so I'm always looking forward to a meeting with her. People who know Linda probably think of Linda that way. But that social cognition, we're always trying to understand our life in relation to other people and who they are and what they're about. Who's for me, who's not for me, who locks arms with me, who does not. And I'm going to say one more thing about this, because in some immunity-related issues, particularly those that are mental health related, the biggest issue that these default mode network patterns create tend to be around depression and anxiety. So if we take anxiety first and relate it to social cognition, when we're always trying to understand how we relate to people socially in social situations, take people who are socially anxious. Everything that they are thinking of in their default mode is, if I say something stupid, what will people say? If I drop this, what will people say? If I'm a waiter, people tell me I'm afraid I'm always going to drop this. And this is why public presenting is the number one fear for 100 years running. What will people think of me if I do or say this wrong? I'll be the laughing stock. Now accentuate that 100 times over with social media. 20 years ago, if I say something stupid, people forget about it, hopefully the next day, other than me. I ruminate on it, right? Now a kid says something stupid in school in his mind, or something that someone thinks might be. Any little faux pas anybody makes is on social media. It has a digital technology life after it. Kids are scared out of their minds of this. So this social comparison, this social cognition has led to something that is described as FOPO, fear of other people's opinions. What will people think? In this social cognition part of default mode is so overly activated. There's hyperconnectivity to it, which feeds the anxiety, the social anxiety that people are so much riddled with at this time. So those are the components of default mode network. So the first part to your question is knowing that is the first part of helping us, thereby boosting our immunity, both emotionally, psychologically, physiologically. And I want to talk about the second way that we best know to go about it, but I'll pause there and see if you have any comments or questions on the dynamics and the function of default mode network.
Well, I think it's really interesting how you mentioned right in the beginning, it all begins with the recognition. So I'm hoping that some of this really stood out to me, and I'm hoping that some of it really stood out to you, thinking about how we start to talk to ourselves in a negative way, and we go down that negative pathway. And in particular, when we start to compare ourselves to others, and we put that expectation on ourselves to be like other people. So just some things to kind of food for thought in that way of us really starting to work on recognizing, what am I thinking about? What am I focusing on? I think there's a lot of power there.
Can I even dovetail with that,
Yeah,
Lynn? I think you
yeah.
raised such a great point. I find a lot of parents do that through their kids. Oh, when I was his age, both good and not good. When I was his age, I already had a job. When I was her age, I already did this. When I was this age, I was never able to buy that yet. Can't believe they already bought a new car. Whatever it is, there's in both directions, there is that comparison, even to the people we love. And it's just stronger in times where we don't find that in people that we love and connect with in that way. So it's incredibly strong. And that fear when it comes to anxiety, I guess one other thing I would say and how it goes against immunity is the more stressed we get over anxiety and depression, the more time we spend in default mode. The more time we spend in default mode, the more anxious we become. So we get this cycle where our default mode can feed a psychological distress and a hyperconnectivity to that distress. We now have a psychological, and I'm pointing to my head because it's like right around here that happens. If we were looking at a graph of it, the network within our brain, this glide path gets created between our worry and our reality, and therefore we become so easily triggered in our anxiety and our worry that becomes more pervasive, and we spend less time we spend more time in default mode and less time with it deactivated. So the longer we're in it, the more depressed or more anxious we're likely to become. The more depressed and anxious, the more time we will spend in it. And I'll give you one example. I've seen this happen so many times that when people are either very anxious or suffering from depression, let's say they even watch like a funny show or a comedy movie, and if a lot of people watch that, that feeling can stay with them. Like still the good feeling of that, even into the next day. But someone who is experiencing depression or anxiety, even though they have that positive experience from that, they can go back more quickly into default mode and reactivate that depression and anxiety, comparatively speaking, to someone else who the good feeling of whatever they experienced is more pervasive. And an example of this is many families will tell me that, I can't believe he seems this depressed. He seemed great yesterday. Or I talked to him this morning and he seemed great, or she seemed great. And now all of a sudden they're saying they're depressed. So it's like these things that have a greater potential to be pervasive when that hyperconnectivity is there than all things equal, comparatively speaking, when depression or anxiety is not present. So I think those things tie in remarkably well in overall health. And I found it that people will often tell me that the more time they're in default mode, the more depressed they become, and vice versa. So I think that's the best description to capture what you were just describing.
So now that we know that we have this default mode and we know it's going to happen, but we maybe want to try to lessen it so that we don't get ourselves into this cycle of having more depression or more anxiety. We don't want it to interrupt our sleep. We want to be able to manage, everything that we have going on. How do people begin to do that, Charles? What can they do about it?
Yes, so we talked about the first one, awareness, just knowing it. We can say, okay, that's me, that's everybody. I'm not going to let that happen to me. So maybe I can just distract myself. I could think of something else, or I could recognize it and say, okay, this will pass. I could just think of something else. So the ability to be able to transfer to a task, or even deliberately. So let's say if it's at night and I'm thinking of this trip and say, I can't think of that, but I do want to plan out my day tomorrow. I'm going to do this, 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 and this. And now I set it and I forget it. That wherever it led me, I dealt with it. And then I didn't perseverate. I didn't ruminate. There wasn't a rumination component. I just set it and I forget it. That's one way to work with it. What research, general science is telling us, the best way to hack this network, the best way to offset this network, in addition to the awareness, is utilizing that awareness to use something that I think is going to become more and more prevalent, and that's a meditative practice. Something where we can develop the trained capacity to see that when we're in that, how to bring it back. When we're in it, how to bring it back. Bringing our thoughts back to the moment, because again, if you even take the definition of default mode, part of the definition is the mind's desire, the brain's desire and skill to leave the moment to be able to bring it back. So to not let the wandering mind go off everywhere, but bring it back to a focus. So you're incorporating a task in a way, something that if there's the best two ways to do it, if you're not doing it with an external resource, like a video or that you're listening to, an audio like Headspace or Calm or SoundCloud, but something where you can, in your mind, just focus on your breath, quiet the mind by spending 3 or 4 minutes internal dialoguing with seeing where the thoughts go, bringing it back to your breath. It's called point-specific focus. You pick a specific point, let's say it's your breath, and every time the mind wanders out, you bring it back to the breath. Wanders out again, bring it back to your breath. So you're strengthening the capacity to bring the thought back on demand. And then as you do that, you're not only strengthening the capacity to functionally manage and self-regulate default mode network, you're also building your capacity for mental health, less likely to become depressed due to default mode activity, more likely to self-regulate your anxiety. That if I can always not let the worry be what I react to, but the strength of my ability to come back, taming the wandering mind, educating the wandering mind, the skill set. I describe it as this. Every time you do this, like every 4 or 5 minutes of doing that, is basically like the psychological equivalent to your brain that 50 crunches would be to your abs, or 50 push-ups would be to your chest, or 50 bicep curls would be to your biceps. That this is a way that we're training our brain to effectively deal with this. And we know that up to 20 minutes a day of doing this meditative practice, if we could develop a practice to do it, we're not only dampening down the activity in that network, but we're growing prefrontal cortex, gray matter, that goes offline when we're in default mode. And this activity brings it more online. So that is the strength, the beauty of being able to do that. But there's one other thing I want to say that's a cautionary note, but hopefully a very positive thing moving forward. That this is still early stages, for one thing. Secondly, there's still people who struggle with that concept of, okay, so you're going to tell me if I meditate, just focus on my breathing for 4 minutes to 20 minutes, or just focus on a point, or focus on one word, or listen to this. This reminds me, meditation reminds me of what running was like 20, 30, 40 years ago. When 20, 30, 40 years ago, running, other than if you were being chased by a dog or the police, was thought of yet a little bit weird. Why would anybody just go out and torture themselves by running? But years later, running became popular. Within the last 20 years plus even, there's been an explosion of marathons, half marathons, 10Ks. The Bellin run has been going for the longest time. People in record numbers come and run it every year. There's no real doubt in most people's minds that running is not good for you. It's a very normalized, universal appreciation for that being something healthy for us. Meditation is often thought of as like what running was 40 years ago. Maybe it'll be a little bit kooky to do it, or it's a little bit fringe, or it's a little bit this. But I totally believe that within the next 3 to 5 years, it's going to be mainstream. I think it might even be faster than that, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But easily within 5 to 10 years, it's going to be like running was. Not only fully accepted, but more even encouraged. Go for a run, do this. This is going to be healthy for you. And it's not just physical to boost our physical immunity, but our psychological immunity too as well, and maybe help offset some of those more prevailing and prevalent psychological issues like depression and anxiety. So that is going to be, I think, what our future holds in store, and how it helps benefit us psychologically, physically, and boost our overall immunity.
So that so resonates with me, Charles, because I was always one of these people that meditating. I can't meditate. I'm a busy person. I have a million things to do. I can't calm my mind. I'm not that type of person. There's no way I'm going to be able to focus. I don't know if I'm breathing right, and all those types of things. And then a couple of years ago, I was working in a department, and I noticed just how stressed everybody was. And I thought, okay, everybody's talking about meditating. Maybe we should try meditating. So I instilled meditation Mondays, where we would just gather, whoever wanted to, at lunchtime. We would just gather for maybe 10, 15 minutes. I would pull up a video on YouTube that was a meditation, So some of it, some of them had voices that kind of, help guide you through the breathing types of things. Others don't. It just kind of depends. And you can find them in all lengths. If you want something that's 2 minutes, you want something that's 20 minutes, there's a lot out there. And honest to goodness, I started doing that. And what I noticed was that my sleep was so much better that night. So on the Monday when I would meditate, I'd sleep really well that Monday night. And I thought, is there something to this? So then I started to integrate it a little bit more, and I started like listening to meditations just before I went to bed. And I will tell you what, that has made such a huge difference for me. And I was the first one to say, nope, this isn't for me. And I think the thing to remember about meditation is you can't do it wrong. You're not doing it wrong. You are literally, I think Oprah says, you're making an appointment with yourself. Spend some time with just you and your thoughts. Focus in on something, and it really does reap a lot of different benefits. And I think particularly, don't you think, Charles, especially with everything that is going on in people's minds in the last year with everything COVID, don't you think that this also can be a really powerful tool to help people quiet their minds from all of that worry?
Yeah, I think part of everything that we're doing when it comes to improving our psychological, and as I always like to say, if we don't have our health, if we don't have our psychological health, right? We don't have well-being without mental wellness and well-being. So anytime we're doing that, we are helping our health, period. So there's sleep effects, there's attention effects, there's more focus the next day, there's being a little bit more happy, a little bit more energetic, a little bit more interactive. We have more tolerance of people, we're less irritable, we're less easily irritated, whatever it is. We are just better for us because our emotionality is more regulated than dysregulated. With the stress just mounting and nothing to do about it, people tell me all the time, I'm more easily dysregulated. Where I get dysregulated, the threshold for it is shorter or slighter than it's ever been. So we want to be able to increase that threshold to increase our happiness. And this is the best avenue to do it. It's as effective as just about anything else we know for our overall well-being. And I was mentioning why I think it is going to catch on, and that fringe element to it, that kooky element to it is going to dissipate over time. And I think in not as long a time as maybe we would have thought. One is that there isn't pathology associated with it. You don't have to have an illness of some sort to be doing it, right? Secondly, the elite athletes, those people on our planet who will do anything to get better, even if it's minuscule improvement, they are willing to do it because everything for them is the benchmark. What can I do to get better? Whether you're LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, and his acceptance speech for the MVP last weekend, Aaron Rodgers said to read and meditate as things to help you be your best. You have people like that, the elite of the elite, who have embraced it. I think that is going to encourage a generation that otherwise may not have wanted to tap into that. And I think you get that type of endorsement, you get that kind of support, and you see what it's doing for them. I think there's greater opportunity for us to embrace it as helpful, advantageous. If you could be the elite of the elite in your sport and you want to do this, then perhaps we can all benefit from this sort of thing. So yeah, I think there's great potential for it. And I just see it as helpful. There's really no downside to it when you really put it all together.
Perfect. So because like we said, we have to practice it. And because it's just like an exercise, just like doing push-ups, just like doing sit-ups, we're going to do a little meditation here to wrap us up. So just a couple minutes to kind of give everybody a little boost this afternoon. So I would invite you to close your eyes if you want. If not, that's okay too. Just begin to focus on your breathing. And this will just be a few minutes and then we will wrap up. So Take a nice deep breath. Let that out. So I want you to imagine yourself driving a car. And this car is a metaphor for your life right now. What kind of car are you in? How full is your gas tank? How fast are you going? Are there any check engine lights coming on? Anything that needs attending to in your car? Now I want you to look out in front of your car. What do you see ahead of you? What's coming up next? Where are you going? Is there a destination that you're looking forward to? How do you feel about that? Now I want you to look in the rearview mirror. What have you overcome, or what have you accomplished in the last day, in the last week, in the last year? What are you proud of? Where has that car traveled from? What's going on outside of your car? Is it sunny? Is it raining? Is there a storm? Is everyone traveling, or are you sitting at a stoplight? What do you have going on in your car? Do you have any music? What are you listening to? Also, who's in the car with you? Is there somebody sitting with you? Is that your support system? Are there other people in your car traveling with you on this same journey? I want you to take one last deep breath. And we're going to slow that car down and bring it to a stop. And I invite you to join us back on our mental health moment. I'd love to hear from everyone. That was literally just a 3.5, 4-minute meditation. I'd love to hear if you feel any differently, what you experienced in that visualization. And as you all chat in, Charles, final thoughts, final words today as we look forward. I guess we certainly would hope that people feel inspired to maybe explore some meditation in whatever way feels comfortable to them. And certainly, you certainly cannot do it wrong. You cannot do it wrong.
You cannot do it wrong, indeed. And even if you're not ready for that yet, and it may be a while, I know I wasn't a taker to it. I thought all was great. I had this thing where it's like, it was too, everyone I had listened to, it seemed like it was like too breathy, like too intentionally trying to make me breathe deep, like that sort of thing. But I've come upon several that I love. I mentioned 2 of them, the Calm and Headspace, but there's one person in particular that I recommend to just about everybody, and her name is Meg James, James, on SoundCloud. They're totally free. It's a web-based thing. There's also an app for it, but hers are like, no matter what, no matter how good you feel, because that's oftentimes what it comes down to. Well, I don't feel bad enough or stressed enough to have to do it. It isn't wait till it's bad enough to need it. It's do it so that you don't. As one famous physician once asked a group of CEOs, how many of you are meditating for an hour a day? And no one raised their hand. And he said, well, you probably should be doing it 2 hours a day. So this is a type of thing that it isn't that we have to be bad to get good. This is all on the plus side of life. That this is, because what I find a lot of people aren't trying to get from -10 to 0. They're trying to get 0 to 10. This is all the upside of life, boosting our immunity, being our best, and any practice that we can do to help stop replaying any negative type of our life and narrative to have a more positive narrative or even a more quiet narrative, we are going in a better place. And every day we're training to be the same as today, tomorrow, not as good tomorrow as today, or even better tomorrow than today. And this is one thing that will help you to be that. So thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day. And Linda, any wrap up, we'll go from there.
Well, I just wanted to read you a couple of the comments because I thought this was really cool. Someone said, well, thanks, Linda. Now I'm crying. I think I need a new car. So having a revelation about that. So maybe some changes, maybe your car needs a little upkeep. Nothing wrong with recognizing that. Someone else wrote, I like where my car is going and I don't want to stop it. So that is very cool. And then a couple things as far as the apps go, Calm, Headspace, and then Charles was talking about SoundCloud, which is free.
All one word.
And I would even just encourage people, when I was doing it with my department, I just brought up YouTube videos and they had beautiful visualizations too. So lots of resources out there. So definitely give it a try. We would love to hear from you, both via email or next month when we all gather again, to hear if you were able to implement a little meditation and what kind of difference that made for you. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. Always great to see so many people taking some time out to take care of themselves. So with that, we'll wrap up for today. Take care, everyone, and be well. Thanks again, Charles.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.